Black folks have a healthy distrust for the medical science community in America. And can you blame them? Science was used to justify slavery, lynching, and the creation of a Jim Crow state, basically to support the lie of white supremacy. The examples are many. For 40 years, scientists used hundreds of black men in Alabama as test subjects to study the effects of syphilis. There's also the case of Henrietta Lacks, a black woman whose cells were used without consent by Johns Hopkins Hospital to make medical discoveries. So you'd have to forgive black Americans for giving a side eye to the idea that medical science is now a potential solution to existing trauma stemming from poverty, joblessness, and exposure to violence. But that's exactly the case in Baltimore, where two different scientific approaches are being utilized to save black lives.
This is brain, human brain.
You guys just got them packed in the cooler like steaks.
These brains are deep frozen at minus 80 degrees because if human tissue degrades if it's not kept frozen. Any human tissue.
Well, we should probably close the lid.
Yeah,
right?
well, I'm going to close the lid. But they're cold.
Dr. Daniel Weinberger is the head of the Lieber Institute for Brain Development, a nonprofit research center located on Johns Hopkins campus. In an effort not to repeat the mistakes of the past, he's partnered with Morgan State, a historically black research university, and other members of the black community to form the African Ancestry Neuroscience Research Initiative. They've collected more than 700 brains donated with the consent of next of kin. I have to be honest, when I first heard of an institute that was collecting black brains, I'm thinking of like mid-1800s when that scientist was collecting skulls of black folks, right? And they were used to prove the lie of white superiority and black inferiority to justify the enslavement of African people.
It's very obvious that one of the issues is the lack of trust and the history of abuse and ethical violations, which, as you point out, is notorious. We're a scientific institution. We're trying to use science to benefit human health. And we believe that the African American community is underserved in this way.
We know it's largely the environment and it's some biology. So we're spending millions of dollars over here in medicine. You showed me a microscope that's over $1 million. But then there are social programs that lack funding to create environments in which African Americans, black and brown people can live better lives to counter these things, these illnesses, right?
I mean, we can't solve all of society's problems, but what we can do is point out that these environments, they actually have permanent, potentially really significant effects on how cells work.
Right.
There's a study that came out of this institute that was published last year, looking at this whole thing about how the regulation of your genome in the cells in your brain is determined by the environment. The biggest factor across the people in the study that determined the rate of change was ancestry. Because people's genomes make them differentially susceptible to events that happen.
But if most of the folks that are in the environment are put there because of structural racism, then those folks will naturally have a common ancestry.
The point of the study was to show that there was differential environmental exposure.
Yes.
And that differential exposure affected the rate of change of regulation of people's genome. Had nothing to do with whether you were black or white. It's just that we know that in these inner city communities,
right,
black children are being exposed to much greater environmental stress. This is about changes in how genes in your cells are regulated. This is the impact of this experience.
Why it would be that this huge group of people would evolve to have all these bad outcomes, I don't know. It contradicts every principle of natural selection and evolution. But lots of people still believe that. And then they can say, we don't have to feel guilty about the structures that are actually causing it. We don't have to do anything about it. We can just leave things the way they are. And instead of an anti-racist approach that says we have to end these structures that produce inequalities, people can say, well, instead, let's just spend millions and millions of dollars on looking for the biological traits that predispose Black people to these poor outcomes.
Dorothy Roberts is a professor of Africana Studies, Law, and Sociology at the University of Pennsylvania. She's written extensively about race in science and medicine and how that intersectionality hasn't always benefited African Americans. Can you talk to me a bit about race-based medicine?
Race-based medicine is U.S. medicine, because U.S. medicine has always been governed by the idea of the racial concept of diseases, that people of different races have different diseases and experience common diseases differently. It's a whole part of scientific research today, is to ask about biological differences between races.
Is that not a fair question to say, well, if Black folks are different from white folks, should we study Black folks in a way that can help them?
One example that's currently part of our lives now is COVID-19. Black people across the country are about 3 times as likely as white people to be infected and to die. That's an extreme, staggering difference. And if you believe that there's something biologically peculiar about Black people, you might start looking for some biological explanation, whether it's a genetic explanation or something having to do with Black culture that produces these different outcomes for Black people. But if you understand that for centuries, Black people have been subjected to an unequal healthcare system and to unequal living conditions, social and structural reasons are really plausible explanations for why Black people would have higher rates of infection and death. And by believing that Black people are some kind of biological group that have these common traits that predispose them to illness, it hides the real reasons that we have to address that are producing these differing outcomes.
People in this city are highly traumatized. It's a city of trauma, man, right now. It really is. This is where it starts, right here.
What area of Baltimore is this?
Sandtown, Winchester, this is the Gilmore Homes Projects. Home of Freddie Gray. You see a lot of different murals and stuff dedicated to him throughout this neighborhood.
James Timpson and Kurt Palermo work for ROCA, a long-running nonprofit organization and recent community partner of the African Ancestry Neuroscience Research Initiative.
How many times you get shot? 20?
23 times.
23 times.
How many dudes you know that got shot 23 times that's living to tell about it?
No one.
The thing is, it ain't about us, it's about you. We want you to do something different because we know you can.
ROCA is a health organization that teaches cognitive behavioral skills to young men in their late teens and early 20s who are dealing with trauma but have limited resources to get therapy.
I take care of myself off the block. You be like,
yeah, but yo, you know there ain't no longevity to that.
When a young brother comes to you, how do you all get him to understand like it's trauma and this brain activity, all of these things are coming together to make him behave the way that he's behaving?
We have these CBT cards that we use, so we could sit with a young person on the stoop just like we are and say, you just saw your buddy get shot. That's the situation. So, what were you feeling? What were you thinking? And what did you do? It works with anything, right? And we have these skills that we might go through, something like labeling your feelings. I mean, a lot of these guys will tell you they're pissed off or they're angry, but, are you pissed off or angry because you're embarrassed or you felt like someone disrespected you?
Let me stop there, because what he said was label your feelings.
Label your feelings, yeah.
In our community, how many brothers are comfortable with labeling their feelings?
Well, it's funny, when y'all said label your feelings, I'm like, I know these brothers are like, man, that's some old soft shit.
It's about that transformational relationship that gives them a safety net to feel comfortable being vulnerable. We got to teach young men that vulnerability is not a weakness.
What do you say to the folks watching this and say, white man didn't put the gun in your hand to shoot another black man? White man didn't put the cigarettes in your lungs? Don't blame it on racism. Why you want to blame everything on racism?
I mean, I would say come to Baltimore for a week, ride around and meet some of our young people, and then tell me that it's their fault. And then tell me that they have control of their situation. I don't know that there's a lot of other cities, maybe a few, that look like some of the neighborhoods in Baltimore City where you can look and there's 15 or 20, I mean, right across from us right now, there's probably 10 vacant homes. And people live next to those vacant homes. Drive 10 minutes that way, it's not like that, right? And that shows you that there's structural, very historic racism happening in this city, and it's been happening for a very long time. It's not the past 5 years since Freddie Gray, it's the past 50 years.
My last 2 years have been tragic. I've been locked up twice. Within the second year, I had got shot 12 times. So I took a lot of ups and downs in these last 2 years.
Sherman is one of Roca's success stories. Before he entered the Roca program, he was unemployed and in and out of the system. He now works full-time at an ice cream shop and still has Roca as a support system. How many brothers in Baltimore need what you're getting right now?
If I had to put a percent on it, 80% of people here need that.
What are they going through?
Everybody that's going through a stage right now with their self. Took me to get shot 12 times to realize that life is really important. I lost everything.
Would you agree that the environment is making us sick?
Oh, no question.
Right?
No question.
The environment is making us sick.
I mean, you're just 5 blocks from where they arrested Freddie Gray.
Right.
And Freddie Gray was diagnosed as a child with lead paint poisoning.
Exactly. Reverend Al Hathaway is a pastor at the Union Baptist Church of Baltimore. He heads the African Ancestry Neuroscience Research Initiative with Dr. Weinberger. He hopes to narrow the knowledge gap when it comes to brain science and the black community. When it comes to the history of Johns Hopkins University and the relationship between black folks and medical research, it's not a good one.
No, it's not.
How do you negotiate that historical trauma of distrust between black folks and medical research with what they're doing at the Lieber Institute?
There is a gap in the information base because one of the issues impacting African Americans specifically is the emergence of precision medicine. The genome data set for which they do precision medicine research on is a European data set. So immediately I realized that we needed to do research on an African American data set.
But when it comes to the things that even the neuroscientists will say cause these illnesses in large part, there's little money given to the organizations and the foundations that are trying to make the environment better for the folks that live and are susceptible to these illnesses as a result.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I do concur. But I believe that by identifying the specific environmental conditions that are causing a high rate of suicide among young African Americans, by identifying why we're having this over sense of violence due to trauma.
Yes.
What I would hope that research will uncover is that the brain is attempting to adapt to environmental conditions, and as it is seeking to adapt to environmental conditions, we are discovering that as it makes that change within the human mind and spirit, that there are points at which we need to assist by changing the environment.
So if the environment is making us sick, then why don't we put just as much money to fixing the environment as we do to studying the mysteries of the brain that will eventually lead to a treatment to the sickness that the environment is causing?
Oh, it's not. I don't think it's either or. I think it's both and.